The ego is the system that runs your sense of self. It is made out of thought patterns, emotions, and behavioral loops, and the stories that try to hold it all together. Left unchecked, it creates endless existential searching, chronic disconnection, and the persistent sense that something is wrong. The goal of my videos is clarity, to see your identity and its contradictions for what they are, named precisely, to finally understand what it is that we're all running away from. You can understand the nature of reality by focusing on three things, and they relate to consciousness and time in a fundamental way. In Buddhism, when you do insight meditation, you meditate on the three characteristics, which is the fact that there is no self, then the fact that everything is impermanent, and the fact that everything is unsatisfactory, or what is also translated as suffering. But suffering as like the foundational layer is like a bad translation. So unsatisfactoriness is a better translation for this. And there are like two types of meditation. One is concentration practice, where you basically focus on a point of sensation, and insight practice, where you meditate on the space itself, or like sensations within the space itself. And both of these at the end will lead you to the same place. But insight is very important, so you can actually see how does consciousness operate. And usually when you say the nature of reality, anybody who is like very analytical or has no relationship to spirituality will say this guy is full of shit. Because it is always intellectualized, right? Like you believe that to know something, you can think yourself to knowing it. But this doesn't work. Because at the ground layer of reality, you have conscious experience. And conscious experience is impermanent, unsatisfying, and there's no self within it. And if you meditate for 50 hours on this, your perspective will shift dramatically. If you meditated 500 hours on this, your perspective will shift dramatically. If you meditate 2,000 hours on this, your perspective will shift dramatically. It's a change within how the brain perceives reality. The same way that if you take like a substance, like LSD, you will also automatically have a deeper insight into these three characteristics. Because when the ego thins, you become deeper aware of these facts. It's just that the way consciousness organizes itself around time and space is what makes you see into what reality is like or not. And if you really think about what it means that reality has no sense of self, is impermanent, or like that sensations rise and pass away so quickly, and that things are unsatisfying, well, they all relate to time. And what we usually do is we get stuck in our heads because we are not actually living in what reality is, but we're living in our fantasies of what reality is. And this happens through human language, because when we speak to each other, we kind of construct our own fantasy worlds. Like the fact that we're using words in the first place to communicate is already kind of like a distance mechanism from reality, right? Because no other animal on this world communicates so much as we do with sound, like with language. I mean, it's not that other animals don't do this, like dolphins and whales and monkeys and to a certain extent, even bees and of course birds and stuff. Like this is kind of normal, but the complexity of the language that we've developed is not normal at all. It's quite insane. And words point to reality. Like when I say all of these three characteristics, I am pointing to something that's true. But at the end of the day, if you really want to verify if what I'm saying is true, you need to meditate on these characteristics, which basically means also to understand time better. Consciousness is time in motion, and you are time in motion, or you are consciousness. And I mean, if you go hardcore to the Buddhist route, then you would say you are also not consciousness, because consciousness would then be another self view. But let's not get bogged down into all the paradoxes in this video. The real thing is that when you see that everything is made out of one stuff, which you can call consciousness, then it also leads you to see that non-duality is true in all aspects of reality or insight. So if you think about everything that I've said, like the three characteristics of no self, impermanence, and unsatisfactoriness, they all relate to how time actually functions. Because in the immediacy of experience, you can see how small everything is. Like how long is a moment? Is it 1 minute, 1 second, 1 millisecond, 1 microsecond, 1 Planck time? It is difficult to locate where a moment of you actually is, because before you can grasp it, it already has passed. And it's this grasping for something while it is already passing that causes a sort of, self-view that tries to believe in some solid identity that persists over time. And it feels very contradictory, because if you think about your childhood, or maybe let's not go that far back, let's say 1 week ago, you kind of know that you right now and the person from 1 week ago are the same person. And it works because you have like a memory that every time you wake up, it basically loads up everything that you've been. And even though you don't actively think about it in your unconscious, this stuff sits there. And from this point of view, you must ask yourself, what is it exactly that transforms, or not transforms, but that moves my identity across time and space while staying consistent? Like, you are the same person now than you were 1 week ago, but you have shifted and morphed so much just in the food that you eat, in the experiences that you've had, how much there is that kind of moves around you all the time. And consciously, like if you notice how awareness is like, you might argue that if you are in the moment having like a shower, for example, and you're in the moment working, or you're in the moment talking to your partner, when you're truly immersed in the experience, you might as well be a completely different person, because everything about your conscious experience is kind of different. You have the human baseline layer, like you're always a human, but there might be a lot of experiences that don't map onto each other at all, because all sensations around these experiences are completely different, but there's still the sense of I, or meanness, that kind of feels like it's the center of attention. And when you do insight practice, you start to notice that this I-ness or meanness doesn't actually exist at all. Like, it makes no sense that there's no identity carrier around moving you from one moment to experience to the next moment of experience. And at the same time, you feel like you are like the same being always. So there's this sort of conflict here. And this conflict is deeply related to how well do you understand time. And if you're always stuck in your head thinking about the past and the future, and have these belief systems that you construct your identity around, then it's almost like you live more in the beliefs of who you are than who you actually are. Or you live more in the opinions that other people have of you than who you actually are. And in all of this process, you kind of lose yourself because you're not actually where you are. You're in some sort of fantasy place in your head. And that's why insight practice and meditation puts you where things are actually true. And it's always here. And this is how you can have access to the true nature of reality. And it's not some some pretentious fantasy. No, it's actually how things are like. And in there, you can also see how all philosophical ideas, for example, like nihilism, the idea that nothing matters, or also existential overwhelm, the feeling that there's too much that matters and the world is completely like on fire at all moments in time and you need to fix the world. Like, both of these views are fantasy, and they have nothing to do with how things are actually like in a day-to-day basis. You free yourself from these overthinking patterns by focusing on how the nature of consciousness works and how time actually makes you up. And consciousness is, in a real way, time manifested through motion. And if you want to define as a sort of more elevated form of selfhood, then it makes a lot of sense to identify with time, because your own experience is in constant movement. And still, since you're always in movement, but there's still this feeling of, selfhood that always stays the same. It's like you are both in movement always and absolutely still at the same time. And a lot of what insight, meditation, psychedelics do is they bring you into the stillness of now. And if you have had like exotic consciousness experiences also through meditation, then you know this feeling of getting sucked into present moment experience. And this often feels like kind of ego death, or a sort of merging with something you cannot really comprehend and is kind of beyond you. And a lot of fear can also get liberated in this process because you have to detach from all of these fantasies that thought make you up. If you know that there is something there that goes beyond your sense of identity, and that consciousness is more so a way of framing your sense of identity within movement or time, then all of these distinctions start to dissolve. And you might also start to wonder if time even exists in the first place. Like, if every moment is equally true now, isn't it also the case that all moments in time are always true now? And the perspective of motion is exactly what makes us into living organisms, because we move through the perception of motion. In theories like the block universe, the past and the future is like always present, like in some sort of block where space and time exists all at once. And from this perspective, the future has already happened, and the past is right now also happening. And if you believe that the theory of relativity is true and that there's no real constant of time, then it might actually be the case that if you think about yourself beyond your physical body and like transcendent death, that you are literally everybody, everywhere, at the same time, at all times. And this is extremely trippy to think about, but even more trippy to experience. And you can actually have experiences of this being the case. Now, just because you can have an experience of this being the case doesn't mean this is actually the case. This is the difference between being in the moment and losing yourself in the content of an experience. I also have a Substack article where I go deeper into the difference between phenomenology, like how something feels like, and the content of phenomenology. For example, if you have an exotic experiences of consciousness where you like see a flying elephant, for example, because you are in some way altered, then the flying elephant is most likely a projection of your mind, and it's a hallucination. But there is really something that is shifting in your experience so that you perceive the elephant as actually real and actually there. And oftentimes these hallucinations can be experienced more real than real. So this means that whatever consciousness creates has like also kind of like a realness slider that you can like shift and morph and increase and decrease. If you're into lucid dreaming, you also know how it's like. Like there are many lucid dreams that I've had that felt more real than my normal day-to-day life. And this sense of awakening experience can kind of be lived through in lucid dreaming. And also, whenever you mention lucid dreaming to somebody who has never heard it before, like knowing that you're dreaming, then oftentimes they get a lucid dream the same night or the next night, and they often are kind of surprised. It's just sometimes the body just needs to know that this possibility exists in order to actually check. And all of this relates to you wondering what is your actual relationship to time and space, and who are you actually within time and space. If you have had a deep dissolution experience and you want to orient yourself in time and space, then check out my ego architecture audit in the link in the description. There is a very freeing part of all of this. When you are always attached to some sort of identity construction in your own mind, or in some future projection, or just guilt tripping you in the past, or being obsessed about a certain ideology, then you'll always be kind of tense, and you'll be in internal conflict with yourself, because the nature of what time and consciousness is transformation. So in order to hold yourself in some sort of solid identity, you must actively resist transformation. And this is by design not comfortable. Suffering is resistance to experience. And there's a sort of friction that consciousness kind of does, where it tries to hold back something inevitable. And it's this holding back that makes you into this kind of person that wants to deny what truth actually is like. And this is the standard operating system of most human beings. That's why they cling to their belief structures. Like most of society clings to their belief structures. Most of society is very ideologically driven. Most of society is in denial about when they are wrong, and they don't really want to know what is true, because then they would have to deconstruct their own belief systems and their identity structure. And that's like what 99% of humans don't want to do, because they do not want to see how reality is actually like. They do not want to engage with the three characteristics, the impermanence of it all, or if they get a kind of glimpse about what I'm saying here, then it's kind of like boxed away and dismissed as kind of too dangerous or too esoteric, or then later there come doubts and you don't really want to engage with it anymore. And all to avoid what I'm saying. And then the safe route for most people is to just go into their heads and keep thinking and keep just like investigating anything but their actual experience of what it is like to be. And it is what it is like to be, where you can have this immediate connection to time and space and start to see that you are time and space. Consciousness is time and space in motion, and you are it. And the implication of being time and space, well, I'm going to cover this in a different video.